are you? What's that beautiful background?
This is, I'm coming to you live from Kenmore Square.
Love it.
So, with some great, old buildings behind me.
Indeed. Some of my favorites. I think we're too young to appreciate the Rathskeller, but that was another great old Kenmore Square building.
Yes, it lives on in song and story, though.
Indeed.
Hi, could I get a mic check? I can't hear anything.
We hear you, Councilor Mejia.
I can't hear nothing.
We can hear you.
I can't hear anything. I'm gonna have to get back.
We can hear you and we see your tile.
Just giving colleagues 3 more minutes. We'll start promptly at 12:05. Okie doke. Hi, Chief.
Hello.
We're literally giving it 1 more minute till 12:05 before we start.
Okay.
And then I will do intros, opening, and then shift the direction over to Counselor O'Malley, the lead sponsor, and Allison and yourself, and we'll guide through that conversation and questions through counselors and whatnot.
All right. I'm gonna finish my lunch too.
Enjoy. All right, folks, it's that time. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Monday, August 23rd, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual working session on Docket 0775, Ordinance Amending City of Boston Code, Ordinances Chapter 7, Sections 7-2.1 and 7-2.2, Building, Energy Reporting, and Disclosure. This matter was sponsored by Councilor Matt O'Malley and is referred to the committee on June 16, 2021. The committee held a hearing on July 22nd, 2021. Today, we're having a working session. In accordance with Chapter 20 of Acts of 2021, that have modified requirements of the open meeting law, we are conducting this working session via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out our responsibilities while adhering to the public safety needs of the moment. The public may watch this working session via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 964. It will be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. This proposal sets emissions targets, performance standards, and reporting requirements for buildings greater than or equal to 20,000 square feet. Establishes the emissions review board with public input to increase accountability and transparency, and establishes an environmental justice buildings emissions investment fund. At the hearing, the committee heard testimony from the administration, panels of advocates, members of the Green Ribbon Commission, and comments from the public. Docket 0775 is designed to achieve equity by developing workforce opportunities and establishing the Emissions Reduction Equitable Investment Fund. The fund is designed to improve public health and affordable housing opportunities by prioritizing environmental justice, populations and communities, and housing stabilization. Building owners have flexibility with how targets are met, with which include portfolio options, individual compliance schedule, and hardship compliance plan. Again, this is a working session, so the committee will review the specific language of the docket. Joining us today from the administration are Chief Mariama White-Hammond, he's the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, Commissioner Allison Brezius, who is the part of the Environmental Department. I think for now, those are who we have from the administration. We might be joined by Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing, and we might be joined by Rich McGinnis, who is Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning at the BPDA. Wanted to note, because this is a working session, today we will not have public comment during this conversation. It is being recorded for public consumption. There will, however, be public comment on Thursday, August 26th at 5:30 p.m. With the Chief Mariama and Councilor O'Malley will be having, yes, okay, sorry, I don't know, I was looking. We'll be hosting a listening session specifically for this, which allows for the public to give all comments, concerns, and suggestions, again, on the language or the concept. There is no, but it will be centered on the public having a voice. So we've also been joined today by my colleagues in order of arrival. We, of course, have the lead sponsor, Councilor O'Malley. We have Councilor Bach. We have Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Braden, Councilor Mejia, and of course myself, Councilor Edwards, who is chairing this. Oh, I see Councilor Flaherty has just raised his hand. Councilor Flaherty at large is also here. Have I missed anybody in the middle of my opening remarks? Mejia and Flaherty. With that, I will turn it over, Councilor O'Malley, and to the colleagues who are here to maybe say something very brief and their support or whatever. And then, of course, the way this will go, folks, is after we as councilors kind of present ourselves, Councilor Flynn has also joined us. My apologies, Councilor Flynn. We will also then turn it over to Councilor O'Malley and Allison Breezius, Commissioner Breezius, excuse me, and Chief Mariama Whitehaven. Okay, so to my colleagues, Councilor O'Malley, of course.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your incredible partnership and leadership on this space. As mentioned, this was introduced back in June. In July, we had an incredible hearing. I think it was close to 4 hours long. In that time, I'd like to note that Allison Breezius has been named Commissioner of the Environment Department, and we are so grateful for that, for her continued partnership and leadership. This is incredibly important to me. This is the culmination of project that began 8 years ago when we passed BERDO, when this council, a very different council, passed BERDO 1.0 along with Mayor Menino. As my time on the council comes to an end in a couple months, it's really important that we add these amendments and change energy and disclosure to emissions reduction. And that's precisely what we're going to do. This is one of the most aggressive but achievable decarbonization ordinances that's been proposed, and it's something that we are really excited about. We know that buildings account for over 3/4 of Boston's greenhouse gas emissions, and this ordinance, which only affects 4% of our building stock, about 3,500 units, that 4% accounts for nearly 60% of all building emissions. We have a really, as I said, an aggressive but an achievable plan. And this is the work that Commissioner Breezius, Chief Whitehaven, myself, and so many advocates who have been working so hard for years to craft this and to craft this well. There's obviously an incredible amount of interest. We've had 90 comment letters over the last several weeks. I would categorize 70 of them as being incredibly supportive. The other 20, I would say, very supportive, but did bring up some thoughts or ideas or suggestions, which we will incorporate through this working session to flesh them out a little bit more. So this is really exciting. And again, the IPCC report, which was terrifying to all of us, shows that we need to take action. We do not have any time to waste. This will be incredibly impactful. And for coastal city like Boston, the urgency has never been stronger. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you to my colleagues for their incredible partnership and support.
Thank you very much. Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you for your indulgence with this traffic in the background. I am coming from Kenmore Square. I really want to echo Councilor O'Malley's thanks to you. Government operations is so key to moving important things like this through, and I know you're really dedicated to it with this ordinance. And then I want to thank our president, Councilor O'Malley, for his decade of leadership in this area, but especially for really underscoring the urgency of getting this done this session. I'm strongly in support. I think the adjectives that President O'Malley used, aggressive and achievable, need to be the name of the game. I think that the city a few years back started to get into the mode of setting good, aggressive targets for where we all know we need to be when it comes to climate change goals. But we have not yet followed those up adequately with the steps that are actually going to get us there. And doing what we're doing, or even doing what we're doing in a tiny bit better, is just not going to get there from here. And so, coming to you from Kenmore Square in my district, there's a historic building behind me. I'm very aware that we're going to need to do this in a way that is sensitive to the complexity of all of Boston's building stock. And I think that there are a lot of provisions in the draft that we have before us that consider that and think about that. But I think that complexity is not a reason for us not to get this done, because at the end of the day, it's very simple. We have to curb our carbon emissions, and our buildings, as the president said, are an enormous part of that puzzle. So really proud to be here, proud to be a part of this and a partner with all of you. I'm in Kenmore Square because a district ceremony from yesterday got rescheduled to today because of the hurricane. So there is a brief part of this that I will miss, but my policy director, Emily Brown, will be on throughout taking notes, and I'll be on for almost all of it. So thanks again, Madam Chair, so much, and Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you very much. Councilor Arroyo.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, it's Matt. There seems to be an issue with the live stream. I've gotten a number of texts, so I don't know if maybe Carrie could or Candace could sort of help us with that.
Thank you. Let me take a brief recess. I do think this is really important that we have as many people able to hear. So 1 second, I'm going to take a brief recess.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm probably 0.5 seconds away from from fixing it. So give me just 2 seconds.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that the public is dying to hear all of our opening remarks, but if this is what's missed, I think they'll be okay with it. So Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to say thank you to the maker and those who have really put in the work to get us where we are. Obviously, with the UN's climate crisis report, that was very sobering. The work we need to do to get where we need to get is pretty daunting. And this is, I think, a start in the direction of getting us into a place where we can have a sustainable, actual climate that our future generations can enjoy. Right now, obviously, we're in a pretty dangerous area when it comes to that. And so I'm very excited that this is moving forward. I look forward to working on this with the rest of you in partnership. And if anybody missed it on the live stream, I'm apologizing because I'm sure that was very eloquent and worth tuning in for. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also want to echo my thanks to Councillor O'Malley for his incredible leadership on this issue for so long. I won't labour the point. I think the UN climate report 2 weeks ago really highlighted the urgency of this situation. I feel that it's like we're 2 minutes off midnight and we need to really get going aggressively, tackle our carbon emissions and do everything we can to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So I think this is very necessary, and I look forward to the working session this afternoon, actually. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to update you, we're back up and running on the web. Sorry about the inconvenience.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, honestly, Carrie, for your incredible work and helping us to continue to do our jobs. Honestly, Carrie, I don't think any of my colleagues would ever deny how hard central staff has worked to make sure that we are able to serve the public efficiently. Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes, good morning or good afternoon at this point. Thank you to the chair and thank you to Councillor O'Malley for answering this incredible, important ordinance. Building in Boston contributes, as we know, to nearly 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions here in the city. Between rising temperatures and sea levels, we're at a crucial moment when it comes to climate change here in our city. And we cannot wait any longer to do something about it. We must reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to meet Boston's goal to be net zero carbon by 2050. And we can't do this without targeting the biggest greenhouse gas emitters. An updated BERDO creates multiple pathways for building owners to meet the performance standards, including on-site energy efficiency improvements, purchasing clean energy, and alternative compliance payments. We are particularly encouraged by the review board component and hope to see advocates sit on that board who have the best interest of our community at heart. We can't just rely on the same usual suspects to be advocating for the same people who have been contributing to all the pollution this whole entire time. So what this means, this is what it means when we say that nothing about us without us is for us. We are proud to have signed on to this ordinance and look forward to seeing it pass very soon. And I know under your leadership, Councilor Edwards, you're going to make that happen because that's what you do. And thank you again to the sponsor as well as the Sierra Club for your ongoing advocacy. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting, and just want to thank the lead sponsor for his years of advocacy on this. I've had a front row seat, obviously, BERDO 1 and BERDO 2, and we would not be here without his commitment and obviously in partnership with Mothers Out Front and Environmental League of Mass and so many other organizations and groups. And the knock on Boston to date has been, I've referenced in the previous hearing, sort of all sizzle, no steak, and lots of studies and let's look at this, let's look at that. So there's an opportunity through BERDO to really move the dial on it, as well as with these very precious infrastructure funds that will be heading our way along with COVID relief funds. So I think we have an opportunity, unique opportunity, and we're well positioned to take advantage of that to really make a difference and move the dial on our greenhouse emissions and putting Boston at the forefront of being truly environmentally sound. So thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting. Look forward to participating. And again, thank you to Councilor Matt O'Malley for his years of staunch advocacy and effort.
Thank you. Counselor Bach.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. I know I wasn't on the live stream before, but I won't repeat all my remarks. Just say I strongly support this. I'm grateful to Councilor O'Malley and you for his leadership. I think that there are plenty of ways for us to be considerate of the complexities for much of our building stock and still say, we must get this done. We have to get it done. There's no way to get there from here on carbon emissions in the city without this ordinance. So thank you. Thanks for letting me go again.
Thank you. And I'll just say this, I am beyond excited about this combination, an ordinance that looks at racial justice, environmental justice, and also acknowledges that the fact that we are building a great deal in the city of Boston. I know some people will characterize this as anti-development. Hardly, it's pro-community, it's pro-jobs, it's pro making sure that we come up with a sustainable way in which we can build our city and also make sure that we aren't putting the lives or the day-to-day lives and the ability for people to literally breathe in the city online. We want to make sure that ultimately, you know, as we develop, we're developing in the most responsible and sustainable way. And this is so exciting to have that conversation. I just want to give kudos to the investment fund too. I see environmental just communities having racial as well as environmental, as well as class issues all combined together. And this is attacking all three of those, making sure that there are good jobs that pay well, but also making sure that what we build is something that is healthy for the community. So thank you so much for that leadership. I look forward to also just acknowledging, I just want to also acknowledge as the district city councilor for District 1, I have, I believe, the most coast line of any district. I know Councilor Flynn and I are going to pull out a ruler one day and confirm that, but I'm pretty sure between East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End, climate change is real for my district. I am now in a flood zone and I live very far away from the coast in East Boston, but it continues to grow what could be flooding and what could be impacted by a climate change. And so I just am so excited about changing how we build and making sure that good jobs come as a result of that. So thank you so much for your leadership, Councilor O'Malley. I look forward, I'm now going to turn it back over to Councilor O'Malley and Commissioner Brezius to guide us through this ordinance. I don't know if you want to go through certain sections and then turn it over for questions. Does that make sense? With that, okay. And then we'll go to the next section and do some questions. All right. So take it away, Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. And can we just get a check with Carrie? Because I'm still getting a couple of texts from folks. So before we get into it, I just want to make sure we're up and running.
Absolutely. 1 second. I understand it's live on the BCC channel, but maybe not on the YouTube one. So it is somewhere for folks to watch. It's a separate YouTube channel, excuse me, BCC is a separate YouTube channel. It is there, but the other channel, I guess traditionally, the council is not. That's what I understand. Carrie? And I apologize, I forgot Councilor Flynn in opening remarks. So when we get back online and get this sorted out, I'd like Councilor Flynn to speak and then we'll turn it over.
I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I'm going to tweet out the link to the YouTube channel right now. And perhaps folks want to retweet it or do the same. Just so I guess I know that we have a lot to get forward. Seems to be.
Thank you.
Okay. You're one step ahead of me, Madam Chair. You've already done it. So I will just,
Yep. So folks can watch on that channel, but we are being recorded and it is being broadcast on that channel that we just retweeted and should retweet. I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to Counselor Flynn. Counselor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for your strong leadership on this issue. And thank you to Council President O'Malley as well for never giving up on environmental justice related issues and really being a champion on the City Council for environmental justice. It is critical that we do everything we can to curb our emissions and fight climate change. And this ordinance is designed to set emissions targets for our large buildings so that we can move forward and move towards carbon neutrality. Climate change is a major threat. It's an issue that is especially impacting my district and Councilor Edwards's district as well. I represent part of the Wharf District along with Councilor Edwards, the South Boston waterfront, the Fort Point, South Boston, the South End and the Back Bay, but we also saw the effects of sea level rise during the storms in January and March of 2018, where the flood shut down sections of the neighborhood and dumpsters were literally floating down the street. I spent this weekend on the phone several times with Chief Osgood about what our response is during this storm. As I mentioned, I represent Chinatown, a neighborhood that is impacted by vehicle pollution. It is an area where most disproportionately affected in our city and state in terms of air pollution from traffic, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists. It is a neighborhood next to the Mass Pike 93, Salt Station train, Salt Station bus, along with the Leather District neighborhood. Emissions and fumes from traffic have been negatively affecting residents in this area for many years. Air pollution can trigger asthma and other breathing related issues. So making sure that we protect our environment and lower emissions is an important issue for me. Additionally, it also impacts Roxbury. It also impacts the South End. It also impacts South Boston and Dorchester neighborhoods that live almost on top of the highway system as well. But I hope that we can all keep our eye on the big picture of dealing with the threat of climate change, sea level rise, environmental justice for our children's future, as we work together to pass an ordinance that is strong yet reasonable to implement in consideration of what everyone's needs. I'm here to listen, to learn. I want to give a special shout out to our activists as well, Mothers Out Front, and their dedicated work. I got to know them through Councilor O'Malley, and they do a tremendous job in the city of Boston. Also want to say thank you to our colleagues in government and the administration officials that are here for your important work as well. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and thank you, Councilor O'Malley.
With that, I'm turning it over to Counselor O'Malley.
thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for your kind words, two kind words and partnership on this. So I was saying to someone this morning, you know, the easiest thing in the world would be we could pass a 2-sentence ordinance saying that every large building needs to lower their greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We'd probably pass it, it would be signed into law, but it wouldn't be fair because it wouldn't be the right roadmap. So what we have before us is a 20+ page document. What we're going to do now is have Commissioner Breezius, Chief Whiteham, and sort of go through it. We're going to go section by section. It's dense, but I think, again, the reason why we're doing public testimony in a couple days is because we want to focus just on the language of this. And then, of course, there'd be opportunity for councilors' questions or sort of some reflections. But in addition to breaking down the ordinance sort of section by section, we're also, because of the great work of Commissioner Breezius and her team, we're going to incorporate some of the suggestions as well as some of the communications that we've received thus far. As has been mentioned, we've received well over 90 different individuals have weighed in. So we want to be as ecumenical as our approach. So Commish, Chief, I don't know if you wanted to just sort of kick things off now, or if any opening remarks, please feel free. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And I do want to reiterate both gratitude for Councilor O'Malley and his longtime leadership on this issue and extensive work on this particular ordinance. also to Councilor Edwards for leading us in this session and sort of guiding this process of talking through these different issues as we think about how to move forward. And to all the counselors who've made the time to be here during this busy season. I do want to note that the big picture reality is that the way this ordinance has come together with the administration and the council working together is actually how we hope this ordinance will move forward in the city. We're going to talk through some of the specific comments that people have raised, but I do want to note that the goal of this ordinance is not to be punitive, but to create a clear pathway and to give people some clarity about what accountability measures will be, when they'll be enforced, what possibilities there are, and hopefully also to create an opportunity for folks across different building types and within sectors to begin to collaboratively work together to reduce our emissions. We think those big picture goals, as Councilor O'Malley said, they're good, but they don't get us there. So I just want to note that because I think at times it's felt as though folks' understanding is that our intention is to be punitive, and I want to clarify, our desire is not to just fine folks and be punitive. Our desire is to create a pathway for us to start moving from intention to action. And I think it's worth noting that. So we're gonna go into the details, and we're doing that because we've received a lot of feedback, some of it really helpful, and you'll notice some places where we made some shifts, but a lot of feedback that also maybe reflects places where there's not clear understanding. And so we just want to stop and take a moment to drill down, make sure that we're all on the same page. So really thankful to be here, know that lots of folks are watching, and look forward to, after this, continuing a collaborative process to move through the regulations and then the actual enforcement of the ordinance. So with that, I'll pass it over to Commissioner Breezius to get us started as we sort of dig into the details piece by piece.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Edwards, councilors, and thank you to all of you who have submitted comments, questions, and suggestions today. Your feedback really has been critical in informing our discussion today. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank the incredible team in the Environment Department who have been working hard on this for the last 18 plus months, and more recently, very quickly, to try and synthesize all of the comments that we have received. As Councilor O'Malley said, we're going to walk through each section briefly and then pause for questions, discussions, potential amendments. Can everyone see the proposed ordinance on the screen? Great. So starting in section A, hopefully the clearest of the sections, this is describes the purpose of the ordinance. And the purpose here is to reduce emissions from air pollutants, including greenhouse gases, from building energy production and consumption. This would support, as Councilor Edwards mentioned and others, the efficient resource use, the green economy, public health, and equitable access to housing. To do so, the ordinance would require reporting and disclosure of annual energy and water use in all covered buildings and compliance with emissions requirements set forth later in the text. I'm gonna jump on to section B unless anyone has any additional elements that they'd like to jump in on the purpose here. Second is the definitions. So in this section, we set forth the terms used in the proposed ordinance, including a definition of environmental justice populations that has been based on the definition recently adopted at the state level in Senate Bill 9. So we have received a number of suggestions and comments here, adding minor clarifications to definitions, and also the proposal for some new definitions. We think that these are good suggestions. Some of the additions include a request to, sorry, I got a message that people can't see the screen updating. Can people see the screen updating?
We mean people in the public, right? Not us.
Public couldn't see that the screen was moving down, but you can see it. Okay, so hopefully it will catch up. So here in the discussion, here in the definitions, we had a request to add a definition of the alternative compliance payments. This seems reasonable, and we're happy to propose a definition to council if you're amenable.
Yeah,
Commissioner, yes, sorry to interrupt. Commissioner, in as much for total transparency, if you could say who, or if there was an organization who made that suggestion, or transparency and also credit for folks who are helping us to build this really good legislation. I think it's great. And then I do have comments from, I'm sure you have them too, from A Better City on their suggestion. Okay, so you're going to go through those?
Sure, I will,
All right.
I will do my best to add appropriate credit here. We also have all of the comment letters that we're very happy to make public after. So yes, I was referring to a comment and a suggestion received from A Better City to include a definition of an alternative compliance payment as it is referenced later in the text. We also had, also from A Better City, a request to clarify and assure that the definition of an environmental justice population is consistent with Senate Bill 9. We believe that the majority of it is consistent. That's where we took it from, but we're happy to add additional clarification. I think the missing piece had been a phrase such as or other such meaning that as is adopted or amended by the Commonwealth's Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs or by state statute. If that is something that people are interested in adding, I think that's reasonable. Certainly a good suggestion. We also had from Masco and LMEC a suggestion that we define a district energy plant and a healthcare institution for the purposes of this ordinance. And finally, I think a number of organizations suggested that we clarify in the definition of carbon dioxide equivalent and emissions factors that a number of alternatives to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. I think our proposal would be that we amend this text so that instead of saying as set forth in an Energy Star Portfolio Manager, we amend it to something of the sort as determined through a process in the regulations so that we can have more time with that methodology. Did others have suggest that is the extent of our suggestions and comments in the definition section? So I'd love to open it up to other questions or other proposals.
I mean, I think that sort of covered the big one. As it relates to definitions, I think that we can certainly help clear things up if there's any doubt. So I think there were, we will continue to review them as we sort of come up with the more sort of focused on regulations, but that's a good summation of what we've heard thus far. And to your point, Madam Chair, the environment team, I believe, has gone through all of the letters and we did a Google form as well where a number of individuals would make sort of not even suggestions, just looking for clarity, which is what we want to tease out a little bit more through this process. So I'm good on that, but colleagues obviously jump in if anyone else wants to focus on definition questions or section B. Okay. Go ahead, Allison.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. This is do it real quick. Now, I have not read Senate Bill S9 for the definition of environmental justice. Communities, do you have a preference between that and another? I really want to make sure we get that definition very clear. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I just got it handed to me. Okay. I understand then in the definition of environmental justice population, it's added just for folks, annual median household income is not more than 65% of the statewide annual. Minorities comprise 40% or more of the population. 25% or more of households lack English language proficiency. Or minorities comprise 25% or more of the population. The annual median household income of the municipality in which the neighborhood is located does not exceed 150%. Was there any thought to adding in the definition, since it's ours, asthma rates, COPD rates, you know, or proximity to highways. Because I can assure you, you know, from either Councilor Flynn who represents Chinatown or myself, I represent East Boston, those highways and the way in which their proximity to large emitters of carbon, I don't know if there's any thought to that. I don't want to water down the definition. I actually think more is good, but I leave it to the experts. But I do wonder if asthma rates and health conditions also should be part of this analysis. If you don't think it should, okay, but I'm wondering. That was my question about EJ communities.
Madam Chair, may I jump in for a second?
Yes, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I'm not an expert on this issue, but I completely agree with you 100% on the asthma and being close to a highway. It's a critical issue in my district, from Chinatown and the Leather District and the South End in South Boston. Look at the kids at the Josiah Quincy School. Their school is practically on top of the Mass Pike, and their playground area is practically on top of the Mass Pike. They're breathing in those fumes every day, and that has a devastating impact on your breathing and your public health and your health going forward. So I agree with you, Councilor Edwards, and I'm so glad you brought it up. I think it's an important issue. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and sorry to just jump in there.
Not at all. I think that's the purpose of this. So I'm happy to add some language around sort of public health metrics as well.
Yeah.
But so maybe we can sort of workshop some language, and then I don't think I asked this officially, but I'd like us obviously to do a second working session before we vote on this. Looking at the chief and Allison, and maybe we can workshop some language on public health metrics.
So I do think it's worth noting that this environmental justice language was heavily defined by quite a few of the organizations that were mentioned, CLF, Green Roots, a number of groups. And the question of including health statistics was considered. The challenge is that there was a challenge around how exhaustive that list might need to be. And so ultimately it was decided to keep the definition a little bit simpler, only because all of the communities that were just, as you were describing, would fit into these definitions. So I'm completely open, but I do want to say that a lot of the advocates were pretty heavily involved in the defining of the state definition, and just, wanting to keep some level of consistency in alignment with sort of where the state is going and where we are locally. But I think we can have a deeper conversation, and it would be worthwhile to loop some of those folks in to understand why they didn't, because I was present at a conversation where this was explored, and there may have been a reason that they chose not to, that I would want to make sure we check in with them, because maybe we might find ourselves in sort of a challenge. So I think maybe reaching back to Green Roots and CPA and CLF and all the crew that sat at that table, just to get a greater sense, might also be worthwhile.
Okay, sounds good. Appreciate the context there, Chief. Okay, I think we're good then on definitions. If we want to just keep moving along, folks. Allison, you want to pick it up on section
Sure.
C?
So section C basically states that the city shall disclose the status of city buildings by May 15th of every year, including annual energy and water use and the compliance status with emissions requirements. So this is a term that was in the prior version of BERDO. As with, so section D, unless there's hearing nothing, we didn't have any specific.
Nope, section D.
Sets out the reporting responsibilities and deadlines for non-city buildings. and goes through reporting data annually to determine building performance, the types of data that need to be reported, and then additional optional reporting that could be used to demonstrate additional elements of compliance, but wouldn't necessarily be required. Any issues here?
The question is, it says that no later than the 15th, right? Buildings, blah, 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 via a defined methodology. But we don't list, that's open to what that will be.
So historically that was developed in the regulations, just the details of which forms are used, whether it is through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, whether we'll be bringing in some other tool for reporting those additional quantities. So we think that that makes sense in regulations, but happy to discuss more here. Also, I paused there at the overarch, but I do have a few comments and proposals in subsection I in the reporting requirements.
I think one of the concerns expressed, and I can't find based on the track changes who did this quite yet, but I will give credit to. It was a good comment. It was about how the EPA, portfolio manager is a national tool that does not always have the current eGrid data.
Yes.
So as a caveat, I appreciate that it's open, that we're looking at defined methodology, but if we didn't want to just automatically follow something that may not be as update, we might be getting ahead of it. That's all. So
yeah.
Just to know.
Absolutely, Counselor. So the benefits of Energy Store Portfolio Manager are that it is a national platform and it is free and open to any building to use, as opposed to a paid platform, but we are very aware of the emissions factor and the corrective action we proposed in the definitions section to say that the emissions factors and the emission would be determined through the regulations was intended to account for the fact that we absolutely acknowledge that the eGrid emissions factor used by Portfolio Manager is not necessarily the most reflective of our local context.
Thank you.
We also had a proposal in this subsection that suggested that and I believe this was from NAOP, but someone please chime in and correct me if I've got the attribution incorrect, that there's no need to have the entire terms of a full power purchase agreement contract here in subsection D, but that instead we could amend it to just say the material business terms of the contract. And we have no concern with that. I don't know if others do.
No, I think we're good.
Great.
The only concern would be obviously is the concern that, it's discretion as to what's material, what I feel or not.
I think we can certainly.
There you go. Yeah.
Regulations clarify.
Thank you.
We don't need how much anyone paid, what the business terms were, but we certainly need to know where is the location, what are the emissions, how much is procured for how long, those terms. Absolutely.
Thank you. And for future, and I'll remind myself, a lot of the nitty gritty will be made up for in the regulations, which will come after this. So I'll go back up a little bit to not 30,000 foot view, I'll come to 20,000 foot view, but reminding myself and folks, we can do a lot in the regulations as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Counselor. Then in subsection 2, reporting schedules, it lays out May 15th as the reporting deadline for covered buildings, including buildings not previously covered in the current ordinance. So we've received a request, I believe, from more than one group to amend that. I think A Better City asked for that to be extended to November 15th for smaller newly covered buildings. We understand the desire to give more time, and we certainly want to give a lot of notice to these buildings. However, we have seen adding multiple different timelines for different sets of buildings to have created complexity in the past, with each building not knowing when their deadline was as opposed to others. So I think out of a desire to keep a consistent reporting deadline, we'd propose an alternative, which would be to be granting sort of initial extensions for these buildings, but to keep a consistent reporting deadline for all buildings moving forward. I don't know if others had thoughts or other suggestions in this section.
Yeah, I mean, I like keeping it consistent at the same date, even though we are growing the universe of buildings that would fall under this. Again, we will get to sort of opportunities to work with folks. So I don't want to, and as Mariama said, we're not looking to be overly punitive here, but I'm much more comfortable keeping May 15th is the deadline across the board. And again, I think you would mention maybe a one-time extension. We can flesh that out a little more, but I'm not looking at the urgency of action demands that we get this done as soon as possible, and I don't want to see more extensions if it's not necessary, especially just for the easy sort of phase one.
We also had a number of people concerned that these buildings wouldn't have enough notice, and we just want to assure that we will be doing, as soon as an ordinance is passed, we will be doing extensive outreach to these buildings to make sure they're aware and have support with how to achieve this.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Anything else in the reporting? If not, we'll move on to direct upload. So Section E, direct upload, allows building owners to authorize a utility or a third party to report data on their behalf to the city. This section, it's important to note, does not create an obligation for a utility to report or remove the building owner's obligation to report the data. So this is an amendment that was intended to increase the ease for building owners in reporting their data to the city, so that it doesn't necessarily have to be a multi-step process every year of the building owner getting the data and then submitting it on to the city, if they would prefer to just have a streamlined pathway. We've had a number of comments requesting that instead this section would impose requirements directly onto the utilities. I can say that we're happy to work closely with them, but certainly concerned about proposing regulations on utilities in this space. I know, Councilor Matt.
Completely agree, Allison. And I think, the fact of the matter is that my concern is we've been to this movie before. We had, struggles when we did the gas leaks bill back in 2016 or so, or 2015. So I would be, I worry that if we were to shift the onus to the utilities, we would not get good data, and we would essentially render this ordinance completely ineffective of what we're hoping to do here. So obviously we want to work, and we want to continue to work, and I have an open door with our utilities, and we'll continue to do so. But I would not support a change that would simply shift the burden to the utilities, because I don't think it would work, and we don't have the power to mandate that, and it would make the bill, the proposed amendments less effective.
Thank you, Councilor. I do think we will also, of course, continue to work with, as you said, with the utilities and building owners to make sure that consistent and correct data is given quickly, and that we get all of the kinks out of that system.
That's right. Anyone else on that? Again, we have plenty to do, so appreciate that. Okay.
Okay. So Section F is the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So as noted, this would set up an Equitable Emissions Investment Fund as a separate fund that would be funded by the alternative compliance payments. The fund would be managed by a review board described in later sections, and would be used to fund local carbon reduction projects within Boston, prioritizing environmental justice populations. The section also states that the further conditions for expenditure may be developed in the regulations related to economic inclusion, housing stability, air quality improvements, and other priorities for equitable implementation. Here we received comments requesting both expanding the allowable uses of the fund, I believe from A Better City, and then a suggestion from the Chamber of Commerce that we change the governance structure of the fund. And I think that this is very tied up, I don't know the rest of you, with the type of work that we'll be talking about with the review board. So the review board, we're going to be talking about a number of their authorities, including the fund, and think that perhaps we need a little more discussion on those as a whole instead of taking this independently here now. But what do others think?
If you want to combine the conversations about the boards into one, I'm fine with that, and that would be in a later section, and it might be more efficient, so that we're just discussing. I think one of the comments is whether it's penalties and alternative compliance are both going into the fund. We can have that conversation now. So I'm fine with what you suggested.
To combine them to it later in the discussion?
Yes.
Any other?
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually am very, we worked hard on sort of illuminating these bullet points. I think it makes sense, and I think it serves the crucial sort of lens that we're looking at this amendment. But I would certainly defer to you. I think that there is many differing points of view on what the review board looks like, and this is such a crucial part of it that we can sort of save this for the next conversation.
Sorry, I think one of the questions was, and this is, I think maybe just for the legal department, do penalties normally go to the general fund?
So I can confirm that with the
Okay, that's all.
department, but yes.
Okay.
So data verification, section G, coming back to section F, describes data verification requirements with provisions for annual certification and third-party verification for the first year of reporting and the first year of complying with emissions requirements and every 5 years thereafter. So really the goal is to have third-party verified data that we all understand, both the building and the city is the correct and valid data. We think that this is important to know the baseline, right? Where everyone is starting from and have the same understanding of where a building stands as we look forward to emissions targets. We've received a number of comments from A Better City, LMEC, and Masco. Both comments that are requesting additional detail around the verification process and the credentials of third-party verifiers. We think those are very important elements to sort out, but that they're more appropriate for the regulations process. And then a number of other comments requested delay in the timeline for verification. And again, understand the desire there, and we can certainly look at that date, but would be concerned that we get good, consistent understanding of the data as soon as possible so that building owners know where they stand and whether they have work to do for the emissions targets that are coming up in the near future.
I think that's right. I'm sorry, go ahead, Madam Chair.
No, I think my question is answered in D, because I said, they're going to self-report and then there's going to be a third party. There might just be a gap. So I see D says that any lack of compliance with the emissions will be subject to fines. So if I report it's at 5 and my third party says it's at a 7, this is because Lydia doesn't know the appropriate vocabulary right now, and 2 is the difference, I would be subject for the fines for 2.
So right? we would work that the details of that verification and resolution process out in the regulation. So if it's 5 and 2 and there's a valid reason for that discrepancy, say you got reported incorrect data, then absolutely we would just work to correct that. If it's 7 and you went ahead and reported 5, then yes, that would be subject to fines until you came back into compliance. But again, we see that as a guardrail, but not a likely scenario.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add, in terms of the request of delay in the timeline for verification, again, I'm sensitive, but I think that the urgency of this moment, we can't simply delay all of these metrics because we're on an incredibly tight schedule as it is, as we all know. And we're very cognizant and conscious in how we set sort of these parameters and these 5-year goals. So we will allow for buildings to get there, but I think if we're setting ourselves up for failure if we just completely, and I'm not suggesting that's what folks are doing here. It's a very wonky, deep conversation that we're having, and folks should and will have enough time to understand it and be able to come up with a plan. But I'm a little skittish when I hear folks looking for delay, because that will again, we don't have the luxury of time anymore. So anything else, colleagues, or shall we go on to H?
Okay, H, emissions requirements. So H sets out emissions requirements for different building types that decrease over time and align with Boston's citywide carbon targets. The building owners would have to comply with the targets on an annual basis. And the section also states that buildings may develop and request approval for individual compliance schedules or request a hardship compliance plan. Buildings that would be newly covered would be required to start complying with those targets beginning in the 2030 to 2034 period. So they would begin reporting their data is basically this next year, but they would have a nice time horizon to understand their emissions and a longer runway to meet those targets as newly covered buildings. Buildings would also be able to blend their targets based on square footage. And here we had a couple of comments, I believe, from LMEC and A Better City and potentially others pointing out that in subsection 2, blended emission standards for portfolios, it says that the blending, or it can be read to say that the blending of the CO2 emission standard would, for a portfolio of buildings, would need approval by the review board. We think that blended emission standards are important. They account for multiple uses in a building and accommodate changing uses of the building over time, and that they're likely to be an important and likely standard element of a portfolio. So we agree that this is a reasonable change to make blending of an emission standard not need application. And then we could instead take this section, split it, and move the definition of a portfolio and how one creates a portfolio up into the definition section.
Sounds good to me. And thank you for flagging that for the folks who flagged that for us.
Okay, jumping on to section I. So section I exempts certain energy uses from the emissions requirements, including emergency backup generation or backup power and electric vehicle supply equipment. The exemption for emergency backup generation or backup power would sunset in 2030 unless otherwise amended in the regulations. And here again, we had a number of comments that run the gamut. I think our comments came from Masco, LMAC, A Better City, and potentially others. We received comments that range the gamut from requests to completely strike the sunset clause for the backup generation to requests to exempt certain types of buildings from the sunset, or I believe that was specifically for healthcare institutions, or to assess the emergency backup options before 2030 and make recommendations based on that assessment. Counselor, did you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with some folks from Masco last week. I think they make a compelling case. I'm hesitant to start, doling out exemptions because, again, it will render this less effective. But I do think that sort of a very specific conversation, or very specific sort of thinking about this more as it relates to healthcare warrants further discussion with particularly our hospitals and our health centers. So, I think that they've made a compelling case. And again, I don't want us to sort of start weakening or watering things down. I don't know that would do this, but I think we should continue having conversations with them in the weeks ahead.
Great. Do other people have thoughts or questions on this section?
My only, and this is mostly again, I'm learning a lot and also trying to make sure I'm clear on what I'm asking. So my apologies. I know some of the comments I have had from folks have been no carve outs. And I don't know if now is the time to address what that means or where in the ordinance, Councilor O'Malley, or what is a carve out and where they are. But I did want to acknowledge there have been people saying that, and I don't want. So if someone maybe
I share that, I share that, and I don't want carve outs either. I think what we're in such a granular level right now. We're talking about emergency backup generation for a hospital in the case of, whatever. And so it's a very, very minor conversation that we're gonna cut out a little bit more. But I would not conflate this with saying we're gonna exempt whole industries because they were organized and didn't want to see this go forward. So I agree. I don't think any of us are proponents of carve outs. I think this is just, again, we are in such sort of the weeds right now. We're talking about an emergency backup generator that a hospital may potentially need, and looking at ways that we could at least be sort of sensitive to that, their unique needs.
And it looks like, and it's set to expire in 2030.
Yeah, well, the whole question is whether or not it's sort of further discussion of that expiration date and going forward.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, section J details the individual compliance schedule. This is similar to the self-improvement pathway in the current version of BERDO. It sets out that a building owner can propose a compliance schedule that differs from the standard emissions requirements in the table above in section G, but that self-improvement pathway individual compliance schedule would still need to remain aligned with citywide goals of cutting emissions by 50% by 2030 from a 2005 baseline and achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. So basically building owners would be able to select a baseline year going back into the past, provided that they do have all of their data that would be needed to verify that historic baseline. And that would be subject to review and approval from the board. We've received a number of comments asking very good questions about the details of how that pathway would be generated and how to handle buildings that would come in and out of ownership or change their typology. These are good questions that we think are appropriate for the regulations development.
Agreed.
Okay, section K outlines the options for building owners to submit a hardship compliance plan for the review board's approval if they are facing unique or difficult circumstances. These may include historic designations, affordable housing refinancing timelines, pre-existing long-term energy contracts without reopeners, or financial hardship. Again, we've received many good comments on the hardship plans, many of which request additional detail, such as the characteristics of buildings eligible for the plans. Again, we think these are things that will need very detailed work in the regulations. One that I'd like to elevate is that several groups, LMEC, MASCO, and others have suggested forming working groups that interact with the review board to develop elements of the hardship plans proposed to the review board for specific sectors.
So please
go ahead, Counselor.
After you.
I think I'm feeling a little bit of a reminder from when I hear the words financial hardship and an exemption or a hardship compliance, and we look at the fiscal sponsorship. I know this will be laid out in the regs, but I am hoping that the profitability is not part of that understanding of financial hardship. part of me doesn't want that analysis to happen at all, but I recognize that we're not, the ability to make a building more green does require certain analysis of how much it's going to cost. And I just want to make sure that we're not putting, again, we hear this at some ZBA hearings, I can't do it otherwise, the numbers don't work. And in the regulations to wholeheartedly, really strictly define what is financial hardship. That's all I'm asking for later. But thank you for considering it. I mean, if you're going to keep the words financial hardship, which I could ask, if you are, then in the regs to make sure it's very strictly defined.
So, Counselor, I could share over after this the current definition of financial hardship from the current version of Berto. It speaks to things like bankruptcy.
Yeah. But to your point, Madam Chair, I think we're all in absolute complete agreement. And the fact of the matter is if you own a building that's 20,000 square feet or higher, chances are that it's going to be a very nearly impossible task to plead financial hardship. I think Allison's right. We're talking about a specific thing, but we can clarify that language for you. And then specifically with the hardship plans as it relates to working groups, I'd argue we have working groups now. The fact that we've gotten many letters and many meetings that Allison and I have been having with individuals and will continue to have. I do think, again, I would appreciate particularly our healthcare sector and the unique needs there. But it's important. So I'm clearly, I would, and we're looking for more people to be involved in these conversations. We want to make sure that folks are compliant. So absolutely, I would be happy to somehow include working groups. I think it's important. It is important for me that we do have a strong, robust advisory board, that the working groups would not be the final say. The advisory board would, but of course a working group would be encouraged to talk to the folks that serve on the board and certainly advocate. But I think it's, again, we want this to be as strong and robust an ordinance as possible. So I'm happy to make that distinction, but that distinction will be made. But bottom line is, I think we're all open to having more individuals sort of, be part of this. We want this to be successful.
I just think as a quick note, again, with the working groups, is that we believe that people will also benefit from learning from each other. That, if one hospital, for instance, figures out a really creative way to do something, we'd love those working groups to also allow them to share that. So I think, again, reiterating, this will work best if everyone's in it together, working collaboratively, and we hope that the working groups are a way to do that. But as you mentioned, Councilor O'Malley, they are not an excuse to study something in place of action.
Yeah, no. Well said, Rev, and words far more eloquent than my own. So thank you. That's you're right on the target with that. Okay, Section L.
Section L, compliance mechanisms. So this details the different compliance mechanisms available to building owners that they may take to meet the emissions requirements. This is not an exhaustive list. Building owners may take any action in their building to improve efficiency or do fuel switching that there is nothing in this ordinance that regulates. That is simply action that they can take and that we think will benefit them in this process. But this goes into the rules, particularly around renewable energy and the procurement of renewable energy. So here, Section A deals with municipal aggregation. So buildings may enroll to receive their electricity through our community choice electricity plan at a base rate or opt up to a higher 100% clean electricity rate and report the appropriate emissions factor for their electricity consumption. So this is one way that, say, a large residential building with a number of tenants, if they opt up, the building as a whole is going to get credit for that action of those tenants opting up or just participating in community choice electricity. Section B, renewable energy certificates or RECs. The ordinance sets out a standard for REC purchases, namely that they must be Massachusetts Class 1 RECs that are generated by non-CO2e emitting renewable sources. tracked by the New England Power Pool Generation Information System. Lots of words. Basically that they are local regional RECs that are mass class 1. They are also specified to be generated in the compliance period in which they are used, and that they are retired within 6 months of the end of the compliance period. This standard is consistent with the community values that were established in the Community Choice Electricity Program, and their priorities that we've consistently heard from the Residents Advisory Group and other stakeholders in the community. Section C, I'm going to get through the sections and then I think we can talk about them as a whole. Section C deals with power purchase agreements, including virtual power purchase agreements. These are also known as PPAs, and they would need to be from non-emitting fuel sources and be generated in a compliance period in which they are used. Any associated RECs would need to be retired within 6 months after the end of the annual compliance period for which they're being claimed. We've received here, and Section D deals with the alternative compliance payment, which is based on the average cost per metric ton of CO2e. Just get the screen catch up, to decarbonize applicable buildings. It's proposed to be set at $234 per metric ton of CO2e, and that amount would be reviewed every 5 years and could be adjusted in the regulations if there was a determination that such adjustment was necessary. So going back to RECs and PPAs, we've received many comments, some honestly contradictory proposals in this space. We've had requests to tighten or even disallow RECs, and others that have asked for the most general and broad definitions of the term and allowable types possible. So this is one where we do think we need a little more time for discussion and listening and with all of you and with stakeholders as we try to work this out. One quick item though that I would like to note is thank you to Boston University and A Better City and others who pointed out that we have a typo in subsection B where it says bundled or unbundled. We propose to strike bundled as not appropriate here. These renewable energy certificates are meant to be unbundled, so able to be purchased at whatever time a building owner needs before or after their compliance period, whereas bundled or RECs or power purchase agreements would be long-term procurements made for which Section B is not meant to apply.
Could you help me and maybe many other people
Yes.
sorry, understand this aspect? This, and I could be totally wrong, this I'm concerned that this looks like the cap and trade back and forth when it comes to, dealing with other pollutants, and that, there's a certain amount that's allowed if someone else doesn't use up all their, or doesn't use, is emitting less of a pollutant, that somehow I can purchase into to emit more, or how. Is this where the carve out concern is, where you just said we're going to have addition? No. Okay.
Well, so you raise a very good point, Counselor. So we have specified here that renewable energy certificates, or these certificates that are the environmental attributes, the renewable attributes of electricity generated in the area, right? So we have specified that a number of requirements, one including that they only be applied to the electricity of the building. So this is a way for a building that has electricity that may have associated emissions, say it's the standard grid emissions, to instead procure renewable energy for themselves, either through a long-term contract like in Section C, or through participating in municipal aggregation or community choice electricity in Section A, or in B, going out and doing what community choice electricity does for themselves by procuring high quality RECs for their own electricity. If we have had proposals, and we would be concerned at the idea of applying renewable energy certificates for electricity to emissions on site in the building, so to thermal emissions. So we're not proposing that they be applied to the fossil fuel combustion of an oil boiler, for example. that wouldn't be allowed in this version of the ordinance or in the ordinance.
But I think also connected to Councilor Edwards' point, yes, there is some ability to sort of not do the work on site and invest, but that's why we're also looking at Class A recs, because in New England, the likelihood is that those recs are going to be sort of a stronger quality. They tend to be a little bit more expensive than some, sort of random wind farm in Texas. And so we're trying to thread that needle in a way that does give this as an option for folks, but says we want to hold you accountable to the highest quality of recs if you're going to use recs. Yes, our main preference would be that people would do the work, but this is an attempt to have some flexibility. And I think one of the upsides of it that, is also applies to our office and some of the work is that it hopefully would stimulate the renewable energy economy here locally, making it easier actually for people to start participating more fully down the line. So we are hoping that, yes, there is some piece of it that allows people to buy in and not do all of the work personally. And at the same time, we're hoping that it actually will stimulate a market that they can take advantage of down the line, because there will be just more clean energy generation, locally.
Yeah, and I just agree with everything said by the two prior speakers, and just add that we very intentionally went with mass class 1 recs because that's what we did with community choice energy. And there is a vast difference between, sort of less I won't say noble, but less robust, a lower robust class of recs that we would allow. So I think that's great. But I think you're sort of, the way you frame this, Commissioner, is to, there's been a lot of chatter on this. There's been a lot of chatter on the review board, and we'll continue to solicit feedback and flesh it out more at the next working session. So I think that's a good overview.
Thank you. Just one final comment to note that in these sections, so we are talking about the largest buildings in the city. So we have a number of buildings that, even if they made themselves the most efficient buildings and they put solar panels all over the top of their buildings, they are still going to have more electricity needs than they can generate on site. And so the question there is, how do we make sure that that is transitioning to renewable electricity over time?
Yeah.
In section D, alternative compliance payments, we had an additional comment here from, I believe, the Chamber of Commerce that it says that the alternative compliance payment value shall be reviewed at least every 5 years. We do agree that it's important to have consistency and a planning horizon. So if instead that shall be reviewed every 5 years instead of at least every 5 years, we don't necessarily want to be going and changing this number constantly. And so wanted to bring that up for discussion on what folks think may be an appropriate timeline there.
Original ordinance is providing for the 5 years.
So the ordinance right now says that this number will be reviewed at least every 5 years. I think every 5 years is fine. The goal there is to acknowledge that technology is changing quickly, and in 10, 15, 20 years, it's possible that decarbonization will be much more efficient, might happen much more cheaply. And so we'd want to keep up with the times in this section. That's the original intent of that, I believe, Councillor.
While also, as Commissioner Brizia said, you've got one number this year, 2 years later, you got another number, 3 years later, so I think the question is 5 the right amount of time to make sure that we're updating to what is happening in the current landscape, but not changing it so much that it makes folks feel like it's a moving target and I don't know, what we're working.
You have to be able to plan investments. Absolutely.
Is this one of the situations where you could switch out shall to may to allow a little more wiggle room? May be reviewed. Well, you'd want to at least know that it would be at least every 5 years.
Or we could consider striking at least, and to the chief's point, selecting an appropriate increment of time. I think that reviewed is not the same as updating either. We could review it. We could lay out clear criteria in the regulations as to what would constitute a need for a amendment.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying strike at least and just say shall be reviewed every 5 years?
I think striking at least makes sense. But I'm open to shall to may as well.
I prefer that
more.
if the flexibility is something that you want, I think at least gives us that flexibility. So it's no more than 5 years will go by before we review. But honestly, it does allow for the regs to set up a faster schedule if need be. And I would encourage, in the next working session or in the regs that we figure out what that is. What's the standard for making it less than 5? But to me, this is a maximum. This is the most will go by before review. And but it's the shall is that the review happens, and then the at least is at maximum every 5 years. So I think the clause is okay and allows for the flexibility. But the lead sponsor, I defer to him if he prefer the shall be may. But I don't want anyone to interpret may be reviewed, right? That they think that that's an option. I don't think anybody wants that interpretation.
Okay, I think you sold me. I'm kind of agnostic on this, so we'll keep shall. And you think keep at least, so it would indicate that there'd be some flexibility there on how frequently, Lydia?
Yeah, at some point we may.
I'm good with that. I think Councilor Mejia may have a question.
Yes.
Councilor Mejia?
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And I'm just curious, just in terms of where this information will live. I'm not sure if I missed a part of the conversation, but I'm curious if there would be any report back publicly around the information that it gets disseminated in a way that folks are able to access it. Is that part of the conversation? Did I miss that part?
You didn't miss it. We're actually going to get to that very level, Julia, and it's a great point. Obviously, making sure, and I know you've done such great work on making sure we have it translated and we have it available, just not online. So we're going to get more specific on that, but then we're also going to get to the review board, which is going to be working hard to sort of help implement these and work with individuals. And then I would just argue that, I think God willing, this will pass and then go into effect. And then I think there's an opportunity for the council to play a role, calling on hearing to check in, just as we've done on some other really big, important legislation.
Thank you for that. I guess, yeah. So to the point is, in terms of I'm always talking about dashboards and accountability and where this information lies once these reports have been produced or whatever. Is there that level of distribution, that public level of accountability? Is that something that we're gonna also be looking into?
Yes, I would. I think we, especially with the review board, and we're going to discuss the membership and how much community gets to be part of really defining, holding accountable industries. And so, Councilor Mejia, there was the investment fund board and the review board conversation that are both going to come up and really defining how community holds us as well as the industry is accountable. But yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think we're good on that. Do we want to go to proceed on subsection B, Dr. Breezius?
Sure. So the next and final comment in this subsection that we have was just to note that while there is no subsection E here, a number of folks have requested that offsets be included as a compliance mechanism, or that they be evaluated as a compliance mechanism starting in 2025, every 5 years thereafter. From our perspective, I'd just like to note that they were not included based on the strong feedback of the Residents Advisory Group, the groups that worked with the advisory group, many of whom had raised concerns similar to those that Councillor Edwards had just raised around the effectiveness and the equity of offsets.
Yeah, offsets are a non-starter with me. I would argue it's worse than doing nothing because it's giving folks sort of the sheen of doing something without actually having the impact. So we won't include offsets as an opportunity for another compliance pathway.
Thank you, counselors. Section M, preservation of documents. So I'm going to take M and N together as they are standard sections that were included in the prior version of BERDO. Section M sets out rules for the preservation of documents by building owners, and N gives building owners an obligation to request and report energy and water use from tenants and details how building owners shall approach making that request. Again, these are elements that have been worked out in the original version of BERDO through the regulations. There are standard request forms that the utilities have provided so that buildings data can be aggregated and maintain the privacy of tenants while reporting the data to the city.
Yeah. And just, do you know offhand what our last compliance rate was with BERDO 1.0, approximately percentage-wise?
So I know that we're working towards our October disclosure deadline. So it's creeping up for this year, but we don't have a final number for this year. I believe last year we were in the 80s, but I will check, which for a year that was extraordinary, I think is very good compliance.
Indeed. So I think we are preserving some of the aspects that have worked well clearly over the last 8 years. And I would say these are two of them.
And then again, disclosure to your points, Councillor Mejia, and this has also existed since the last one and preserved. Section O describes the provisions for annual disclosure by the city of covered building data information, and added is information related to equitable implementation of this ordinance, including the information about the investment fund, the balances of fund and expenditures, and information about projects funded. Here we received a letter of support from the Conservation Laws Foundation supporting the disclosure of environmental justice metrics, including air quality, energy cost burdens, fair housing and housing displacement, jobs, and other metrics related to equitable implementation. And we have also received a request from A Better City that the city issue annual reports on the Equitable Emissions Fund, and that seems a good addition.
Sorry about that. Yes, and that's, again, thank you, Councilor Mejia, for bringing up sort of that outreach, affirmative outreach we can take. So thank you. I have no further comments on that, on section O.
Okay. Section P is outlines the enforcement timelines, including failure to comply, injunctive relief and fines, and combined with section Q outlines the penalty schedule for failure to comply with reporting requirements or to comply with emission standards or failure to accurately report information. It also allows the review board to grant penalty reductions or waivers in certain extenuating circumstances. I'd like to highlight in these sections, because we did have a number of comments seeking clarity in this space. First is to note here that we have proposed different fine schedules for the largest buildings that already exist under the current BERDO, and then for the smaller buildings, well, still very large buildings, but the smaller of the large buildings that are being added to the cohort here. We've received, again, very broad comments on this section from those requesting more timely and aggressive enforcement of these sections to those requesting that fines be reduced or removed. So really running the gamut here. We have some comments that seem to indicate that fines would be expected as a normal part of this ordinance for buildings. I want to clarify that fines are really intended to be a last resort for those buildings that are actively not participating in the ordinance in decarbonization. There are a number of compliance pathways, in fact, multiple compliance pathways that are available to buildings ahead of time, and then even multiple compliance pathways that are available to buildings if they come to their reporting or performance standard deadline and realize that they haven't quite made it. So fines really are that last resort for buildings that aren't participating, that haven't sought a hardship plan, that haven't exhausted many of the other pathways available to them. So I don't,
Two questions.
yes, go ahead, Counselor.
So I want to make sure I'm clear on the municipal fines limits. I had always understood the city of Boston, the max any city could charge based on state law was $300 a day. And we can run that through legal. If that's true, then I would want to break down the different levels of fines that they're doing then. So each fine is resulting in a $300 max. So what levels of violations they have for this isn't just one fine of $300 a day, if that's the max. I see that there's $1,000 a day. And if that's perfectly fine through legal and within our purview, that's fine by me. The other question, so what's the maximum that we can actually charge in fines? That might have to go to legal right now. I don't know it off the top of my head. The other concern, or not question, but the other thought that I have is, you know, the crux and the hook for a building is always in our zoning. It's always in our permitting. It's always in our, you know, occupancy. So have you thought about linking, now some of these buildings are already built, so it's the, you know, but with the zoning or with the permitting process, or if they choose to seek an expansion of their building, if their lack of compliance with this, with Berto, is on record, their ability to move and build elsewhere should be severely hindered until you show you can do right by us in the one building you have or the 2 or 3 buildings you have. Have you thought about a section for that? I don't know that it should, I don't know that doing that kind of hook in the regulations will be strong enough. I think you might have to have a little bit of a legal authority. So have you, to the lead sponsor, and to the, I think Allison, you worked on this as well, Councilor O'Malley, extensively, first and second version. Have you thought about hooking this in with our permitting process, ISD or something like that? You know, every building owner is going to come to us in a different department at some point. I just can't imagine. And what frustrates me, building owners who have OSHA violations and still being able to build, building owners that have wage theft violations and or subcontractors and still being able to go through another department. If you have a Berto violation and you are to the point that the city's now fining you, before you can move on to another building or expand yours or do something else, I think the city should be, well, the city should not allow it. That's being too harsh. Councilor O'Malley.
I agree with you. I worry, and I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. So I do worry that we could get into some legal challenges if we were to restrict zoning, you know, for another project to something that was owned here. But I think your point is right on the money, and I think that would indicate the need for sort of political opposition if such a scenario were to unfold itself. I don't know that we could include something specific in the language, and I would hate to have a well-meaning poison pill or a well-meaning suggestion that I agree with be seen as a poison pill and somehow perhaps jeopardize the legality of this. So we can certainly explore it more, but I think we might have to be careful. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't then have a separate pass this and pass a separate amendment to the zoning code that simply says if you own, you know, if you own a building that comes under Berto and you're in compliance, you will not be able to be granted a, you know, ZBA hearing or something along those.
And I do think, you know, I agree with Councilor O'Malley, just some concerns about like how, you know, how that might position this, but I do think something that actually takes into account the breadth of things that you just mentioned makes a lot of sense, because often people are not just bad actors in one place, but unfortunately owners in multiple places. And I think it may be more effective to put something forward that says, if you're in bad standing on these, you know, 7 measures, whatever number of measures, it should be taken into account, you know, in whether or not you are allowed to interact with the city in another form. But I worry that putting it here would not be appropriate. Though I agree with the sentiment for sure.
But Allison, can you explain, I'm smart enough to know that you're a lot smarter than me. Can you explain to the chair's question about the fine schedule? Why are we allowed to go above those sort of city clerk mandated limits?
Sure, I will take a shot and then I will refer ourselves to the legal department. But if we look in our purpose and our authorities, we named a number of authorities here in addition to Chapter 21D, which is, I think, the one you're referring to, Councilor Edwards, that allows for the civil fines up to $300 a day. We named MGL Section 40U that could in theory be implemented here, which has to do with liens. So we are looking at alternative pathways. Again, ideally, we are never at this space. The goal is to work with buildings, but if that is necessary, that is there. And then under MGL Chapter 11131C, I believe is our authority for the larger fines, but happy to add additional clarification there.
Thank you.
I would just add in terms of the fines, agree with everyone that's been said. In an ideal scenario, we don't collect any fines because everyone's in compliance or working to get on compliance. But we did go at rates, and I've mentioned this before using the Fenway Park parking example, where up until a couple of years ago, it was cheaper to park in a resident-only zone around the Fenway and get a $40 ticket than it was to spend $50 or $60 to park in a lot near Fenway Park. So we wanted to make it, again, aggressive but achievable, and that's why they're higher than perhaps what we're used to seeing.
Another last element here that we are looking into is that I believe the Conference of Boston Teaching Hospitals made a proposal that we consider corrective action plans as an additional element here. That's one where we've requested a little bit more information to understand what something like that might look like, and we'll absolutely share it with council when we receive it.
So just to close the conversation on the fines, thank you so much for defining the authority we're pointing to beyond 21D. And then in terms of if you're not in compliance with Berto and you've been fined to be, by the review board, by several checks, right? That you're not complying with this. And this is a matter of public health, right? This is a matter of our future and our ability to grow as a city responsibly and also sustainably. I'm happy to work with you, Councilor O'Malley, maybe on that zoning amendment. Once this becomes the law, that this non-compliance with this law, which we haven't created yet, is grounds for denial of zoning relief of the various forms. If that makes more sense, I understand your point. Make this the law, and then have our zoning code adjust for that law.
Absolutely. I would love to partner with you on that. Hopefully we'll pass this in relatively short order, and then we'll be able to get that done after.
Relatively short order, no pressure, Councilor Edwards, no pressure. Get this done.
Okay. Review board. Section R would create an emissions review board appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. It details the expertises to be held by members of the board. Term lengths and overall composition would be specifically that 2/3 of the seats shall be nominated by community-based organizations. The section also specifies the relationship with the Environment Department and the board's responsibilities, which include funding, capacity building, staff support, annual disclosure, policy administration, and enforcement. We've received a number of, in fact, numerous comments and suggestions around the review board and its composition and authority. And we're working to continue to compile and reconcile that feedback, and believe that there should be likely, I think, Councilor O'Malley, this was your suggestion, that there be a more dedicated time to discuss this in more detail.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I look forward to my colleagues' sort of feedback now, but I think that, we want to do an overview today. It's already, we've been doing this already for nearly 2 hours. So if the chair is amenable to a second working session, we can get into some of the more specific, both regulations and I would argue sort of more specifics on the review board. But, suffice it to say, I think that the way it was phrased certainly makes a lot of sense. Added the chair of the council's environment committee. When this goes into effect, I will not be it, but I like having that. I also, would respectfully push back on the arguments that we need less community-based for the notion of having experts. And I'd argue that we will be putting experts on, many of whom will come from the community. But I think that we'll continue to solicit feedback, but welcome my colleagues, take on this element.
Real quick before I turn it over to Councilor Mejia, the 2/3 membership has been something I heard a great deal about, especially from organizations like ACE and CPA, and making sure that the community is grounded in having the selection for who should be sitting on this board. I want to make sure, though, that this doesn't guarantee that 2/3 of the members will be from the community, just that the community will be appointing 2/3 of the members, community organizations.
That they'll be nominating.
Nominated as a pool for the mayor to pick from, and then the city council to confirm.
Correct. It's not dissimilar from what we're doing on the Civilian Review Board, where we're soliciting names. The council is then putting them forward to the acting mayor. The thing that I very purposefully included in this was allowing for council approval, which we have, as you know, on some boards, but not all boards. So I think that will allow for the council to play a significant role working with the mayor and members of the community and members of industry to come up with a reflective board.
Well, I fully support keeping the 2/3. I know there's been some suggestion to reduce that number, but I'm fully supportive of those 2/3, and I really want to make sure that when we're thinking about the community organizations, I know several are already positioned themselves, but do we have that defined, community-based organizations someplace?
We do in the beginning under the on page 2, page 3, CBO. Community-based organization means a non-profit organization that is driven by community residents, that is the majority of the governing body and staff, consists of local residents. The main operating offices are in the community of service. Priority issue areas are identified and defined by residents. Solutions to address priority issues are developed with residents, and program design, implementation, and evaluation components have residents intimately involved and in leadership positions.
Excellent. Okay. Councilor Mejia?
Sorry, can you hear me now? So I guess to this point, I'm just incredibly curious about what kind of sort of lived experience standards we might be able to look at when we're building this review board. I think that's part of the process too, is just kind of really thinking about what that looks like to ensure that we're not creating this with just the same usual folks who show up. And then I'm curious, kind of want to really express my support for this section, especially in making sure that that the community-based organizations like BCAN are empowered to nominate people who will have the best interests of the community and not just the polluters at heart. So I just really want to kind of drill in that accountability piece and recruitment and thinking about how we get there.
So if I may, Madam Chair, I appreciate that, Councilor Mejia. I'll just read, because this is becoming, I think, such an important part of this this amendment. So to answer the question, and obviously we're all open, I think, to other suggestions, but the way Section R reads, this is to Councilor Mejia's point, there is established an independent review board appointed by the mayor and approved by the Boston City Council. Members of the review board shall have expertise in environmental justice, affordable housing, labor, workers' rights and workforce development, building engineering and energy, real estate development and management, public health and hospitals, historic preservation, or any combination thereof. 2/3 of the members of the review board shall be nominated by community-based organizations, which we just read the definition. The chair of the Boston City Council's Environment, Resiliency, and Parks, or their designee, shall serve as a member of the review board. The regulations shall establish the number of seats on the review board and designate community groups and organizations to nominate individuals to serve on the review board, subject to the mayor's review and the council's approval. Members shall serve for a term of 3 years. As the term of any member expires, their successor shall be nominated by the organizations identified in the regulations and appointed by the mayor. Vacancies in the review board shall be filled by the mayor, subject to council approval for the unexpired term. And every 3 years, the mayor shall designate a member to be chair of the review board. So again, I didn't, I want to be mindful of time. We'll get into more specifics, but that's sort of that's our starting point. And again, if counselors have thoughts, or if there's something as we talk about lived experience, other attributes, maybe we should be listing as well. Obviously all ears.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilor O'Malley, for that clarification. I think that sometimes just we're always thinking about how do we define expertise. And I think that there are some folks who are living these realities that may not be part of any expertise, but might be able to provide some input. So that's kind of want to just throw it out there in terms of creating space for folks who can weigh in.
Great, I completely agree. And I think it's actually, this is more than many other sort of advisory boards or commissions. I think that takes into account exactly what you're saying, but certainly appreciate the point and agree with it.
I think, and I think we'll talk about this in greater depth. I think the key is, and we started to think this through, we'll need to think about like, what is the possibility of public comment and how can people, engage? Because I think we will need commissioners who, similar to the Conservation Commission, can serve in what probably aren't the shortest meetings ever, and will have an ability to, so over time, they don't have to come in with all of the expertise, but they will have to learn over time how to sort of evaluate a portfolio and things of that like. So we will be looking at what the different pieces of expertise are. And I think that there's also an opportunity to look at how the public is able to engage. So I don't think it's the only space for engagement is not just being on the review board, although that will be very important too.
Good point. Okay. Any other comments on review board, or we're moving into the home stretch.
I know, and here I come. Block. Swing and a miss. I caught it. Sorry. We did park the investment fund review board to talk about as well when we brought up this board. If you recall, just to remember, we had separated that, the investment fund. We said we would talk about this board and community.
Yes. And I believe, Councillor, they're as written the same board. It's simply two authorities for that board. One is the allowable uses of the fund, which I think we said we would come back to. Is that
this time, or did you want it at the next working session? Did you want it at the next working session or now?
Councillor, I defer to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we don't make, we leave it as is for now, and then as we sort of get to the second working session, where we have maybe some more. I mean, I'm open to it. If there's specific thoughts you have, it's written, I think, in such a way that we're very intentional about how it was written, and I think that, I think we keep it parked until the next session. And if individuals have some specific proposed changes that they think in terms of making it, either more broad or less broad, or however, it seemed unclear what some of the feedback was other than big picture items, we will certainly, be receptive to hearing suggestions, but I don't know that we need to sort of go back on that at this point.
All right, then. So maybe then, actually, after your listening session on Thursday, you'll probably get the most feedback actually on the review board and community role and standards for both. And then in our next working session, you'll be able to bring that. I'll watch the listening session or participate in as much as I can, and we will do that. So just wanted to make sure we didn't park it and then not deal with that. So
no, thank you for bringing that up again. You're right. Okay. Commish, if you want to.
Okay, so section S just disbands a pre-existing advisory committee to be replaced with the review board, which is the new section above. And then section T instructs the Environment Department to review implementation every 5 years with at least one public hearing to solicit public comments. The section also allows the Commission to suspend any portion of the ordinance on the recommendation of the department that a significant obstacle is preventing implementation, or that its implementation has negatively affected energy cost burden, equitable access to housing, or other factors set forth in the regulations. The department may also recommend revisions to the regulations as needed. So here we have a general clause, basically thinking of things unforeseen, such as the COVID pandemic, or a lot of the goals of this ordinance we want to continue to track and make sure that we are implementing them, but there are unforeseen conditions. So this allows us to come back and review if our metrics are trending in the wrong direction.
Smart. That makes sense.
Section U, regulatory authority, details the Commission's regulatory authority to promulgate rules and regulations, the standard section, calling out that authority. And again, quickly here, applicability describes the ordinance's applicability vis-a-vis other restrictions and obligations set forth in other laws. Section W specifies the ordinance's provisions would be effective immediately upon passage. And section X indicates that building owners shall receive notice within 3 months of passage of disclosure and reporting requirements, and specifies that notices shall be sent to the contact information listed in the assessor's database unless a building owner provides alternative contact information. And that ends section 1, which is the majority of the updated ordinance. This next section 2 proposes some minor changes to the Air Pollution Control Commission to add additional members. We've had a number of comments asking for additional clarification of the roles and responsibilities between the Air Pollution Control Commission, the Emissions Review Board, and the city. Again, we're happy to propose some clarifying language either in regulations or in a document that would just be a companion document to explain the roles between them, but do think that this will depend very much on the outcome of the discussion about the roles and responsibilities of the review board. So should be part of that discussion. And then finally, we have section 3 is a standard severability clause that clarifies that any section of the ordinance, should it be held invalid, shall be considered separately from the remaining clauses, which shall remain in full force and effect. And section 4 states that provisions shall be in effect immediately following passage. Again, here we received several comments asking us to delay the effective date, either out a certain amount or until regulations are fully complete, or a number of other items there. I don't know, Counselor, if you had any thoughts on that.
On, I'm sorry, on section 3?
On section 4,
okay, the final. Oh, I do. I'm sorry, Allison. I can't multitask. Yeah, we've heard from some folks, saying we should wait until after the mayoral election, after new council seated. That's just bunk. It's, this came from the city council. We were all elected 2 years ago. And, the acting mayor has all the powers to sign and enact legislation. And I appreciate her partnership on this. This is a real partnership. And at the end of the day, our opponent here isn't, well, I guess technically it could be just if these amendments don't pass, but it's really our equal opponent is inaction and waiting and delay and delay and delay. And we've done it on climate. We've been saying the right things, and we have to actually put some ideas and words to action. And that's precisely what this does. So I would, respectfully, but forcefully push back on any ideas that we should delay or we should wait to take action until the next election. We simply don't have enough time, and we're all here. And again, this is something that I'm absolutely committed to seeing through to completion before I leave the city council.
Thank you so much. Thank you also. I mean, this was one of the best working sessions I've ever been honored to be a part of. I want to thank you for your clearly immense amount of work in preparation for this. and all of the public comments that we received that you clearly vetted and knew to respond to. So I want to thank you, Councilor Mel. I know your office did an extreme amount of work. I want to thank the chief, and I want to thank the commissioner and the administration for, obviously you did an immense amount of work already knowing to center and ground in community and bringing that voice here. So thank you so much to all of you. And of course, to my colleagues on the city council, thank you for staying the entire time, that those that could, and providing again perspective. I think we have our marching orders. We have basically, I would say, shrunk the haystack as to what is going to go into our next working session. And then further from there, there'll be, hopefully after that working session, we'll just literally have what's going into regulations to define for at a later date, and what changes we will make on the face of this legislation. And any supportive legislation, such as the zoning amendment, Councilor O'Malley, that might help enhance this. So I'm very excited to keep moving on this conversation. We will, our offices will coordinate. The listening session, again, folks, is this Thursday from 5 to 7, I think, at 5:30 to 7. I'm sorry if I've got the times mixed up. Councilor O'Malley or the chief, if you wanted to go ahead and promote it again. My apologies. Can't find my notes. The
Yes.
listening session.
So it's going, go ahead.
5:30 to 7:30 this Thursday.
Thank you very much. And we will advertise and put, I think the link, and we can all retweet and make sure that's promoted. I assume obviously it will be for those who need translation services. I know we had to coordinate, to please let us know a little bit in advance. We will meet that standard. Just help us to know that you do need a little bit more time, and that you will need interpretation services, Spanish, Chinese, and so on and so forth. And we've accommodated it and did accommodate it in our hearing, as you recall. So I'm now going to turn it over to the lead sponsor for any closing remarks, and then my other counselors, and then we will end today's working session.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for not only your leadership here, but your real interest. You asked some really good questions, and we're going to have a stronger and better product as a result of it. Thank you, of course, to Chief White Hammond, to Commissioner Breezius, amazing partners in this. Again, in 11 years, I've never had a situation where literally you've got the legislative and the executive branches working like a hand in glove to make sure we can get this done and get this done right. And it's been really an honor for me to work with both of you and your teams. A special shout out to my chief of staff, Jessica Morris, who has been my tireless quarterback on this, so much so that she's actually on vacation today and has just spent the last 2 hours, not at the beach, but sitting on her laptop in Florida. So thank you, Jess, for your great work. And most importantly, to all the advocates who've got us this far. Again, this is nearly 2 years in the making that folks have been sitting in rooms when it was safe to do so, having online forums, putting some really good ideas going forward. And we are on the verge of passing something that will be one of the most impactful pieces of environmental legislation the city has ever seen. And it is one that every week that passes, as people talk about this, as the media reports more on it, I'm getting calls from our counterparts in local government from literally across the country looking for ways to emulate this. So we can really be on the vanguard here. There are a handful of cities that have already done it, but nothing quite like this. And I'm just so grateful for each and every one of you and cannot wait to get this passed. Again, we have run this as openly and transparently as possible, and that offer still stands. Any business owners or industry folks that might have some questions, Allison, myself, the chief, we're happy to meet with you. Allison herself has offered to walk through what a potential compliance plan might look like for your building. We're going to do everything we can. We want this to not only pass, but we want this to be done well and done right. And that's our commitment to each and every one of you. So once again, thank you all. It's been a long afternoon, but incredibly worthwhile afternoon. We will see you on Thursday evening for just complete open testimony. And then again, hope to have another working session in relatively short order. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you. Per the request from Christine O'Donnell, just to let folks know that the listening session is not a formal committee conversation. So if you do write us, which some people have been writing the Government Ops Committee for, we can give you the link, but it is not something that that the City Council is formally chairing. And it's not something formally that we'll be taking attendance like we normally do, and so on and so forth. It'll be as flexible as the chief and the lead sponsor would like that conversation to be. And so just wanted folks to know we will continue to give you the link if you write us, but it is an informal not a formal session from the city council. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
all.
job.
Bye.